In this video, I'll be talking to you about the concept of workflows in mWater and how workflows can help you manage your day-to-day activities. Imagine this, a borehole breaks down on a Tuesday and someone calls the office, and 2 weeks later, the manager asks one simple question: has anyone actually gone to fix that borehole? I'm going to build a complete borehole repair workflow in mWater. From the moment a problem is reported through assessment, repair, supervisor's verification, all the way to a closed ticket. Now, if you can build a survey in mWater, you can definitely build this. And let's go and look at how we can do this from scratch. Okay, before we build anything, here's the finished product so you know where we are going. This is a workflow type called water point repair. And think of a workflow type as just a blueprint. It defines the process once, and then every individual repair becomes its own workflow that can move through that particular process. Now, our blueprint has 5 steps. First is the start. This is where a problem gets reported. Then it gets into the assessment stage. This is where a technician visits and evaluates the issue. And then we progress to the repair state. This is where the particular repair visits are logged, as many as it takes. And then from there, we move on into the verification stage. This is where a supervisor confirms the repair actually worked. And once that is done, it gets into the resolved state. And here, the ticket is closed. Now, notice 2 things as we scroll through this. First, the workflow does not just move forward. It moves in loops. If a repair, for example, fails, it loops back to the repair process again, as you can see through this particular loop. Now, in another scenario, for example, if a supervisor rejects the process at this particular stage, this process can loop back to the repair state. That is 1. 2, for every action, it indicates who can perform it. Notice on my right pane that it indicates, for example, who is assigned to this particular task. Supervisors can verify, technicians can log in repairs, and the workflow enforces the roles, so you as an individual do not have to do so. All right, let's build this from a blank page. Now, from the portal, I'll go to workflows, and then I'll go to workflow types. What we see here are different workflow types that have been created already, but we're going to click on new workflow type so that we can create a new workflow. Great. We have a couple of templates that have already been created for you, but we're going to start this from a blank workflow type. I'll go ahead and name my workflow first, so I'll give it a name. We'll call this borehole repair. And for the description is very important. It matters because this is what your team sees when they are deciding which workflow to start. Good. Okay, and we'll go ahead and save. Now we land on the design tab, which is where the entire process gets built. You'll also see tabs for documentation, translate settings, deploy, overview, and workflows. We'll come back to deploy near the end, but for now, everything happens right here in the design phase. Notice how it gives us a couple of alerts already. This tells us that something is wrong with our workflow. Our workflow type must have at least 1 entry, workflow type must have at least 1 step, and it must have a completed step. Now this can't be resolved now. We can only resolve it once we have the different steps, the different entry, and the completed state indicated, and we'll see how these are resolved themselves one at a time. Okay, now at the top of our design tab is the configuration section. This is the workflow's memory and its rules. It includes the different variables, summary fields, alerts, and custom role. Let's set up each one of them. We'll start with the variables. First, let's set up our variables in this particular instance. Variables store information that the whole workflow can actually use. So I'll add one called boreholes, or we'll call this the water point, so we can choose the type here. In my case, it's going to be linked to site. I want to link this to a particular site, and then I'll name this boreholes, or let's just call them water points. So this type is the reference, and it points to our water point sites table. This links each of the different repair tickets that we'll have to the actual water point on the map. Its location, its history, and everything mWater already knows about this particular water point. So it's very important that you have the right type. One variable is all we need here because the forms inside our actions will capture the rest of the different attributes that we want to look at. So we'll go ahead and save this. We've created one variable called water points. Now, let's look at what we call summary fields next. This usually show at the top of every workflow. It's the at a glance information that you look at immediately open a workflow so that nobody has to dig deeper into your work. I'm going to add 3. We'll add borehole name. Let me call this water point name instead so that we do not limit our water points to only boreholes. So we'll pick this from the variable. Since we've already created a variable water point, we want to link that directly. And I'll go to the water points and I'll use that particular name. We'll save that. We'll come back later and then go ahead and set up the alerts and complete the other summary fields. But for now, I'll go ahead and add what we call custom roles. Deployments usually have what we call the admins, managers, and observers. But for our process, we will need 2 more specific roles for the repair work. One, we're going to need the technician. So we'll add a technician. We'll call this technician. And you can give an optional description if you have one. And then we'll add another role. And my role is going to be the supervisor. Our second role is a supervisor, and then we'll save this. So we'll see how these custom roles work as we progress with our setup. So in this case, the technician is the person who is going to assess and conduct the repair, and then the supervisor is the person who go ahead and verifies that the repairs have actually happened and they actually hold. So what we just did is that we defined the roles here in the general blueprint. But who actually fills these roles and which real people are assigned to this gets decided at the deployment. That means that one workflow type can serve every branch, each with its own technicians and supervisors. We'll see how that works. Entry points, basically, this is how a repair ticket gets created in the first place. That's what an entry point is. We are going to create 2 in this case scenarios, but notice that it also indicates that before you create an entry point, you need to have a very first step in which this particular workflow is gonna start in. So that makes it necessary for us to first create a first step, and then we go ahead and add an entry point. So let's create a first step. The backbone of all our workflows are going to be the step. A step is basically a stable point where the workflow waits for people to act. A workflow is always in exactly one step at a time until an action has been completed. We'll add 5 different steps, and I want you to pay attention to each of these other statuses that you'll see. Now, I'm going to create the very first step, which is I'm going to label as the start. The status matters because it's very, very important. It matters for filtering, reporting, and when someone asks a question like how many open repairs do we have, that answer comes straight from these statuses. Anything in an active step is open work. Resolved means that it's done and it counts towards your completion matrix in your KPI dashboards. So now once we have created our very first step, we can go back and now work on our entry point. How does a repair ticket get created in the first place? That's what entry points define. This first one is a manual entry point, and we'll call it manual. This puts a button in the portal and the app where, let's say, a receptionist at the office receives a phone call about a broken borehole, and then they manually start the workflow. That is one. So once you define that, you make sure that you set the entry point to manual, and then you define the name. Then probably if you have a description, you could also include the the description. Now, we have to direct this particular entry point to a step, and so we are going to direct it to the start step. So every time this entry point is entered, every time a workflow is started through this entry point, it starts at the start option, and you can redirect it to another step as well. But for this particular example, we'll start it at the start. And then you can go ahead and define who can start this workflow. Like we created our roles, we had the technicians and then the supervisors. In this case, I could want my technicians to start this particular step. And then after I'm done with that, I can go ahead and save that particular entry. We'll create entry point number 2, which we'll call from the site page in this case. The second one is a clever one for me. It's a site entry point that is tied to our water point site directly. And as you can see, we can further go ahead and label it, and then we'll indicate the entry point type as a site. That means it's triggered from the site page. Now, here's what it does. Anyone looking at a boreholes page in mWater from the app, or maybe that could be during a routine monitoring, they'll see an option to exactly start that particular workflow related to that water point right there within the water point. And then also notice the automation that you can be able to create. I'm able to set my automation variables to water point, so that when the workflow starts from a site page, it automatically fills in our borehole variables with that exact site. There's no searching, no typing, no which borehole did you mean. The context comes free. And then we can further go ahead and then define who exactly can be able to perform this task. And that is basically how you create your second entry point. Let's progress to the next phase. We indicated that we're going to add 5 steps. We started with the start step. Now we're going to add the assessment, the repair, the verification, and then the result state. And how we'll do that, it's simple. Now, if you navigate down here, you'll see that there's an option here to add a step. So if I click on that, it's going to ask me what step do I want to add. So this is the assessment stage that we want to add here, and we'll keep this active. We'll save that. For now, we are not going to add the transitions. Let's just work with the steps that we have. I'll call this repair in progress. I'll save that. I'll add another step. In this case, we'll call this one the verification stage. This is also an active stage. We'll save that. And then lastly, we'll have our resolved state. And this, I'll set it to completed. Once the workflow reaches this particular stage, it closes the loop. I'll go ahead and save that. Now, notice we have a couple of more warnings that have come in, but these are basically indicating a few couple of things that we need to include. For example, actions, and then transition each step to the next particular step. Once we get that done, we'll see these errors as well get down. The status matters and is very important for filtering and reporting. For example, when someone asks, how many open repairs do we have? That answers come straight from these statuses, and anything in an active state is open work. Resolve means done, and it counts towards your completion matrices. You can use that for your reporting and etc. Right now, these steps are empty rooms. Let's furnish them each with different actions. So now we'll start to add a bit of actions to each of our steps. I'll add the first action to my step, and in this case, I want to create a mini form that captures a couple of information on what has happened exactly. So we'll call this form issue reported. And you can add an additional description if you want, and we'll choose to use mini forms. So this creates a simple form within the workflow that can be filled in to capture additional details. However, you can actually link an entire form. This is an entire survey form that you could have designed with the normal survey design tools, such that your different technicians can fill in a complete form based on how it has been structured. There could be manual entries. It could be triggered by a sub workflow. You could start a sub workflow, or it could be a timed action. All this, you have a complete material that tells you what each of these particular action types does, so you can read more about that. But for this particular demo, we'll use the mini forms. Now, can design this right away from here, like just how you design surveys in the form designer. The same particular process you'll use here. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to use, but for the purposes of time, I'm not going to design them from scratch. I'll just copy and paste a couple of my questions in here. I've already designed some of these questions. So for example, my first question would ask, which water point is this issue for? Now, for those that are watching this video for the very first time and you've not used mWater before, we have a complete video on how you can create different forms on our YouTube channel, so go visit that out. Pause here and go visit on how to create surveys within mWater, but the same principle would apply here. So the next question probably I would want to capture is, let's say, date and time when this breakdown happened. So I'll include that time as well. And then I'll want to know what is the issue. I'll add that particular question. Was it identified during an in-person visit or over the phone? And then I want to capture additional information, such as what triggered this in-person report, that is in case if it was an in-person visit. So I could go ahead and edit this particular question and add a condition. Okay, so what this means is that if a person selects in-person visit, we'll ask this particular question. So the next question I'll be asking in this case could be, we're looking at the functionality status of that water point at that time, and then we could also ask how long has the water not been available from this particular source since the breakdown. And then we can also ask the particular technician to take the photos so that we can be able to verify that information. So this helps us capture that particular photo. Then we can go ahead and proceed and set the steps. We'll set this once per workflow, such that this particular action can be performed only once in each workflow process. Now, workflow, these recurrences, this means how many times this particular action can be taken within one workflow. Recurring, that means that within within the same workflow, this action can be performed multiple times, or this can be performed once per workflow, or this could be performed once per step. So that means if we get into this particular step, it can only be performed once. Okay, now this is where we define the roles, who exactly can be able to perform this particular role. And in my case, I want my technicians to be able to perform that role. And then I can go to who can view the details of this. So I want all my managers and supervisors to be able to see what is happening. The workflow creator can be able to see that. Even the workflow technicians can be able to see that particular details. But I should also let my technician be able to view the workflow details and see what happens. Now, next we're going to look at the automations. So what this means is that what happens immediately this particular action has been performed. That's an automation I want to set. So the automation I want to set here is that once this action has been performed, this task should be assigned to given roles. So I'm going to assign to given roles. So in this case, I will assign this to my technicians. This is what I'm going to do, and it should apply always. And then I can go ahead and set my transition rule. What does this mean? This means that after all these particular factors have been fulfilled within my action, what happens is that now I transition to the next step. So I'm going to add a transition step. After this particular action has been performed, I want my particular workflow to move to the next step. So I'll transition it to the next step. And the next step I want it to go to is to move from the start to the assessment stage. And I want that to always apply. Now, in case I want it to apply after it is fulfilled a given condition, this is where you can set given conditions. For example, it can only proceed if the water point is either partially functional or non-functional. We're going to save that. Now we have been able to create an action that transitions into the next assessment stage. So next is in our assessment stage, we are going to add a couple of actions here as well. The very first action we are going to ask is an assignment action. This lets the workflow creator or the supervisor hand this specific job to a specific person, let's say a technician. So we are going to call this particular one assignment, and then we are going to check this, and then we are going to assign this to as technician. So the recurrence, you can set this once per step, and you can assign who can perform these particular roles. In this case, I want my supervisor to be able to do an assignment. Even the workflow creator could be able to do that. Workflow creator could not be the technician or even the supervisor, so you could just include them there for making sure that, just to make sure that no one is left behind. Same thing, you can add, I want my technician to view, and I want my supervisors to be able to view this. And then what I can do now is to transition this to the next phase. If I have a transition to make, or if I have an automation, I could add that. But for this particular step, I want to have two actions. One is the assigning action, and then the second one is the evaluation process. The second action I want to add is now the evaluation process, where the technician goes to the field and does the verification. The form is going to ask a couple of questions, such as whether the water is currently functional, date of visit, assessment of the issue, and many others that currently verifies that the water point is actually having something wrong. And then it goes ahead to state how urgent the issue is, and if someone needs to do an immediate action, and they'll send the report. And in this case, I'll also use a mini form. So I'm going to go through this fast so that we don't consume a lot of time here. I'll call this a mini form. I will design our mini form in this case. Notice we have a question on estimated urgency, and we'll see how we can actually use this to create automation processes. Okay, now I also want you to notice that if you have some values that you want to be pre-filled into this form, you can as well add those particular values so that you can pre-fill this form. Now we want this to be performed once per workflow, so we'll set it to that. And who can perform this? We want the technician to be able to do that. Who can view the details? Let's have both the technician and the supervisor be able to view these particular details. And then we can go ahead and create a bit of an automation here. So we are going to say we are going to assign these roles. We are going to assign it to the deployment managers or deployment admins, but when they meet a given criteria. For example, if the estimated urgency is very high, we assign this to the managers. So where can we get that information? We'll get it from the pre-filled information, or from the information that would have been captured in the mini form. Talks about the urgency. So if the urgency is any of, let's say, very high, we can have this escalated to the deployment admins. So we've created a simple automation here. And do we need to transition this to a next step? Yes. So once this has been filled up, we can now say, let's transition this to the next step, which is the repair step. So we move to the repair in progress process if this has been fulfilled, and we'll save that. Now we have two actions that have been created in this assignment. I'll go ahead and create all the different actions for these ones a little bit faster, but follow along with me. Now, let's look at the step where boreholes and water points actually get fixed. And this is a step with my favorite piece of design in this whole workflow. One action. We're going to have only one action for this, and we are going to call it the repair state. We'll fill a mini form for this as well, so that's what we're going to do. And our mini form would have a couple of questions, like for example, We want to know the date the repair happened, and we want to describe the repair actions that were conducted. We want to take a photo to verify that the repair actually happened and the water point is now functioning. And then we'll ask the technician to fill in this question that indicates whether the repair is completed or not. And then if the repair was not completed, why was the repair not completed? We want to know that as well. So we'll design that mini question. I'll edit this a bit to add a bit of a condition such that so if the repair completed is no, we then have this question to respond to. And then we can go ahead and say, let this run once per step. We're going to assign this to the technician, and then we are going to assign this to both the technician and the supervisor. I want them to see. But also, if the workflow creators are not in any of those particular roles, you could add them. But let me add my supervisor here as well so that they are in copy of everything that happens at that particular stage. And then this is now where it gets interesting. This is what I want to see, how we create the branching for an action to progress or not. Now, where do we want this to progress? If, for example, a repair has been completed, we want it to progress to the next step, that's the verification stage. If the repair has not been completed, we might want it to remain in the repair progress, and that's how we create the transitions here. Now I'm going to add a couple of rules. I'll go and say, let this transition to the verification stage only if a given condition has been met. So we'll get to our question, was the repair completed? And if the answer is any of yes, then we will progress to the verification stage. Whereas if we say this repair was not completed, then we can say let it remain in our repair in progress state, and then we'll save that. Now we've created a branching situation where an action within the repair log activities can define the direction in which this step progresses. Either it remains here or it progresses to the verification stage. Amazing, isn't that? Now, at this particular level, if you want a safety net here, this is also where you would add a timed action, a reminder that fires after, let's say, 7 days in this step, and it notifies the deployment managers that the progress has remained here for a very long time. So you would add that as an action, and then here you would look for timed action, and that would help you to actually notify the managers after this particular progress has remained here for a very long time beyond what you expect. So we'll save that. Now, our step transitions into the verification step, and this we can go ahead and add actions in the verification stage here. And that is the end of my particular mini form for this particular form. Okay, I'll set this up for once per step, and then I can as well go ahead and define who can perform this role. Now here, I'll not add my technician. I just want to limit this to my supervisor so that the technician cannot overrun any of this particular step, and it's only performed by the supervisor. And I might say I don't want the particular technician to see whether this particular process has been undertaken or not. I'll just keep this to the supervisors as well. And I can as well add a transition, add an automation at the end of it. Now, look at how amazing this is going to be. This is where we can also create another branching criteria. Here we are going to have two transitions again. Verified, we go to resolved. Rejected, we go back to repair in progress. Let's add a transition. Now, we want this to move to the resolved state if only it meets a given criteria. And what criteria is that? If we get to the verification status and the verification is verified. Yeah. If the form was indicated by the verifying manager that is verified, we can go ahead then and move to the resolved state. Otherwise, if it doesn't, we'll go to the repair state, back to our repair state, and then we'll go ahead and set this criteria as well. And if we say is any off, rejected, it goes back to repair in progress state. You can see that. Great. And we're going to save this particular transition. And now in our verification stage, we can see that once this particular action is performed and the supervisor indicates that this particular issue is verified, we get to the resolved state. If it indicates that it's a repair in that it's rejected, then it transitions back to the repair state. We've created the branching chain that we talked about at the start of the video. So in my last resolved state here, I would want to just have a quick checklist or a quick action that is performed by strictly our technician, our supervisor, or what we would call in this case the admin. Under the resolve state, I would want to create basically one simple action that can be performed here. It's basically indicate that this is resolved. And I'll stick to the mini form for this particular case. And I'll go on and label this close repair ticket. And after we're done with that, we're not going to have any transition here because we do not want this to transition into any step. But with more complex automations, with more complex workflows, you could actually make sure that this have another timed action so that after, let's say, 3 months, it moves into another sub workflow that does, let's say, a checkup call to find out whether the water point is still functioning. So this can be as complex as possible. This is a very simple one that I'm using for this example. Now we'll save that, and now we have our workflow completely designed. And you'll notice that we no longer have any errors message here since we've gone through all the different steps and stages. If we go to our overview, we can already start to see how our workflow overview has formed. We can see we have 2 entry points. We have the start, we have the issue reported, we have the assignment, we have the repair progress, and we have the branching options that we saw in the beginning of our workflow, and we have the resolved. We can also see that if the verification does not work out, we can go back to the repair in progress. We have achieved our workflow, but there are a couple of things that I didn't mention we'll get back to. Now that I have my full workflow set up and different steps and different questions that I'll be looking at, I can come back and set my alerts. So I'll come back and add an alert and I'll indicate. Now these are the different levels that we have. We could have multiple ones, but I want to say if my level of urgency is urgent, I could label it and say this, let this be in the danger state, so that it changes the label from, you see, what we had yellow to red. If I change it to info, we have this color. If I change it to warning, we have this. If I change it to danger, we have red. So this indicates that this needs immediate action. And we're going ahead to configure the alert situation based on the information in our forms that we collected. So for example, we would say, we go into the latest actions that are going to be performed, and then I'll go to log repair, evaluate borehole issues, and under this I'll go to my technical diagnosis information, and then required resources. Remember, this is the information that we designed in our mini forms. So I'll get to my emergency level, and if it's any of very high, then I'll get that alert. I want to add another alert that warns me when the date from which the issue was reported and the date from which the repair was completed exceeds a given number of days. Let's say it's between 7 to 30 days. So between 7 to 30 days, I can just warn and indicate that a repair is under urgent situation. It needs, the repair is overdue. So I need to have a warning for that. I could set a limit such that if the time between when the issue was reported is between like 7 to, let's say, 30 days, we can warn and say the repair is overdue. And that is also applicable if at that time the water point is still indicated as not completely repaired. So how do we set that up? So I'm going to add an alert, and then I'm going to call this repair overdue. So this means that the time for repair reached, but a repair has not yet been done. So how will I set my condition? I'll say, for example, days since. Let's say if the days since the latest time, or sorry, the days since the latest report was issued, was reported, and I'm going to look at the date and time when that issue was reported. And we have agreed that if the date is between 7 to 30 days, we can warn and indicate that it's overdue. So we'll use between, then select our days, 7 to, let's say, 7 and 30 days. So anything between 7 and 30 days, we're going to warn and indicate that this repair is overdue. But also we just want to be sure that in between these 7 to 30 days, the repair has not happened yet. So we are going to check into another step ahead and find out whether at that particular step the repair had been completed or not. So we're going to add a second condition and say, and when we go to our repair action and we go to repair completed, we are going to ask if it is completed or not. So if the repair is completed, it says a no, then we conclude that this report was reported and it has exceeded the 7 to 30 days and a repair has not yet been completed. So it's going to warn us and indicate that the repair is overdue. We've set those two criteria labels, and for now let's stick to this, but you can create as many labels as possible to help you look out at the data and monitor every step at a time. So I'll go ahead and save this, and now as you can see we have a couple of alerts that have been set up. Now another thing is that we could as well add more summary fields, but for the sake of making this video short, the same way we added water point as a summary field, you'll see the same way you could add the other summary fields. We've set up our workflow, and now we have a complete set of workflow with the different actions and the people that are supposed to perform them. We have an overview structure that already shows a complete set of how our workflow flows and etc. Now, the next thing we have to do is to go ahead and deploy it. A workflow type does nothing on its own unless you have deployed it. Now, over to the deploy tab, and we see how we can do that. Now, I'll call this a one main operation. Now I'm going to start to add my deployments. I'm going to keep filling in my roles. I'll name this deployment. I'll say this is the test deployment. Remember, we indicated custom roles. Who are the technicians, who are the supervisors. Now, this is where we now fill the individuals, the actual persons that are supposed to perform these roles, such that every time this role transitions into a technician's role, the people that are under that are able to be notified. So you can go ahead and have multiple people here as the different technicians, and then you can have multiple people here included as the different supervisors, and then you go ahead and save. You can have observers, and then you can also have initiators. Oh, these are users or groups who can start any workflow in this deployment. So you go ahead and then save our deployment, and once that is done, we have our first deployment set, and then we can go ahead and start to look at the workflows as they come in. We can see the dangers alerted here. Now this does not have a complete any set of workflow that has been completed, so we can't use this much to demo, but I'll show you from what we used in the beginning. Now what I've opened is the complete one that has a couple of workflows that have already been filled, but this is just the same thing that we have completed designing a couple in the last 30 minutes or so. And this is now how you'll be able to view your different workflows as they come in. For example, you can now see the water point name in case that was filled, who it was assigned by, and then the agency level. We can see the alerts as well, the active those workflows that are still in the active process, and which step that particular workflow is still in, and when that was submitted. And you can go ahead and filter by different roles and etc. Now, importantly is that you can always reference these different workflows in your dashboard so that you can have tables, graphs, charts that indicate where your work is. And if there's any issue, you can track them in an interactive dashboard within the mWater. For those that are new to this video and you have not interacted with visualizations in the mWater before, we have a full video on how you can be able to develop the different visualizations and use these different workflows to show in your different data. Now, this can help you to move from a notebook, WhatsApp group to a well streamlined processes that reports your steps process by process, and you can be able to visualize them in a complete dashboard like this. Let me know how it goes if you try it out. Otherwise, thank you so much for following through. We've always been available to support you with any questions, and we can offer guided one-on-one. But we also have a resource center that can have complete guides on how you can set up this, and material that shows you every detail about every step that we talked about in details.